Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the PopSciLens podcast, the podcast that uses media as a vehicle to explore real-world scientific concepts. In the first part of the show, we'll walk through a piece of fiction, looking at a variety of production techniques, tropes, and themes. And then in the second half, we're going to have a conversation about the science behind some of the story's core ideas. In this episode, we'll be looking at the science behind the 1993 classic sci-fi film produced by Steven Spielberg, Jurassic Park, of course, based on the book by Michael Crichton. We'll go ahead and recap the events of the movie and then offer a bit of commentary on its themes and ideas. And then after that, we'll take a look at some of the biological processes behind cloning that could actually be used to produce a real Jurassic Park. So if that thing sounds like your thing, please stick around. I'm joined today by my friend Tyler. Tyler, if you want to tell the people at home just a little bit about yourself.
Hi, I'm Tyler Durham, pop culture junkie and fan of science fiction and stories in general. I'm not entirely sure what I've agreed to be a part of, but I'm looking forward to trying this out. So, thanks for having me on, Dan.
You're welcome. Not like a ringing endorsement there, but you know.
I'm excited, dude. This is gonna be a lot of fun.
No, yeah. I appreciate the candidness, I guess. So yes, 1993 movie Jurassic Park, starring Sam Neill, Laura Dern, Jeff Goldblum as our three principal characters. Also with an appearance by Samuel L. Jackson and Sir Richard Attenborough. So,
and of course the main character, the T-Rex.
Yes, the main character, the Tyrannosaurus Rex. It's really a crime that she didn't get star billing. You know, I think she was robbed of of her name appearing first in the poster. So we start out, as all good movies do, with some jungle sound effects, and we see some trees swaying back and forth, and we've got a bunch of guys with some tasers, and Robert Muldoon, played by Bob Peck. They're surrounding this giant crate, some sort of large container is being pulled in on a crane, and it's pulled up to this enclosure as we get information that this takes place on the island of Isla Nublar, and we get a view from inside the crate itself, looking at all these guys standing around with a bunch of tasers, and they begin pushing the crate into position, and Muldoon's like, I want tasers on full charge. So you know this is whatever's in there is no good, right? Like this is something really menacing, obviously. So yeah, they go ahead and raise up the gate, and they're about to release the raptors into the enclosure, and one of the raptors kind of smashes into the back end of the crate and knocks it out of position, grabs this guy, and it starts thrashing him around and lifts him off the ground. This is a very energetic raptor. Can I say that? It literally pulls him like 4 or 5 feet off the ground and just flings him around like a rag doll. So we just kind of see the upper half of his body just being moving up and down like an elevator. And all of this is happening while they're like tasing the crap out of this raptor. So I'm very impressed with its stamina.
It's a very hungry animal.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, as far as the raptor scene goes, I mean, it is just like one of the most iconic openings in movies in a lot of ways. It's one I still remember from when I was a kid. And it is, I think, interesting with the context of what the raptors are. That does feel like a lot of energy coming from inside the crate, but you really don't know what you're looking at the start of the movie. So it does work more when you first see it than when you go back and look at it again. You go, oh, yeah, that's the raptors.
Yeah. No, I don't mean to like rag on the scene. Like that's kind of like a funny thing in retrospect, but as an opening scene, this is great. Like this is like kind of genuinely terrifying. I think, and I think it proves that you don't need to like show like a lot of gore or like viscera to make something really memorable. I mean, just the image of like that guy's arm being like sucked into the gap in the crate while Muldoon is like, shoot her! Great stuff. Like that's like a real clear visual I have from this movie.
Yeah. And I mean, that's one of the things about horror in general. This first scene is absolutely shot and intended to be scary and horrific. One of the most important things about horror, especially in a visual medium, is that in general, unless you have one of the most interesting monster designs of all time, it is best to keep the monster hidden and in shadows and let the audience fill in the gaps themselves, because what they come up with in their heads will almost always be scarier than what you come up with, unless you happen to have been on the set of the thing.
Yeah, definitely. So this poor hapless Jurassic Park guard is dragged into the crate and killed, and then we dissolve to an amber mine deep in the Dominican Republic, and we see the lawyer Gennaro showing up here, telling the head of the dig site that they're facing a number of large lawsuits over this incident, and that their financiers are demanding that a very thorough inspection be done to assess the park's safety. You know, they already have Ian Malcolm, but they don't. They think he's too flashy. He's not professional enough. They want Alan Grant. We close in on a little bit of amber that they find in the mine, and there's the mosquito in there. And this is just also one of the great key visuals in this film. And it's just kind of made its way into pop culture in general. And we dissolve from there out to the Montana Badlands, where Dr. Grant and Ellie Sattler are digging in the dirt, and they shoot this radar probe that goes into the ground, so they can see the skeleton of Velociraptor buried in the ground. And this is a nice kind of way to get the audience some more information about just what these dinosaurs are, and like how powerful they are, and how terrifying they are, again, without actually showing anything, right?
Yeah.
And you've got this little punk kid who's like, that's not very scary. I'm not sure why there's this kid here. Is it part of like a tour group, or does he belong to like the adults? And like, is he the child of one of the paleontologists, or is it just like, or alternatively, maybe it's just a random Badlands child just roaming the Badlands?
Well, I mean, thematically, I absolutely know why the kid's there. Why he's there in story, I have to assume it's some sort of tour, because even as little as Grant likes kids, I can't imagine he would treat the kid of someone he works with quite as badly as he treats this little kid.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, I was also just going to insert that scene is actually also really economic storytelling, because it does two separate things at once. One, it establishes how the raptors work, so that later on when they show up, we know exactly why they're scary. And it also shows us that Grant does not like kids. So it's establishing both stakes for the dinosaurs and also giving us the start of a personal arc for Professor Grant.
Definitely. Yeah. And he pulls up this raptor claw, and he leans down next to this kid, and he's like, and they flash at you with this, like a 6-inch retractable claw. The attack doesn't come from the front. No, it comes from the sides, like where you least expect it. This is important. This foreshadows a death that happens later on in the movie, so make note of that. And then he's like, and then they slice you right across the belly. So you're like, this is terrifying. Try to show this raptor some respect. And now a helicopter appears, just flying out of the blue, just makes a mess of their entire dig site, just sprays dirt everywhere. And Grant and Sadler head back to their trailer, where we meet John Hammond, played by Richard Attenborough, who was there to invite them to his biological preserve off the coast of Costa Rica. This is a great establishing moment for his character as well.
Yeah, I actually made notes of this because him showing up in his helicopter the way that he does is a really interesting move, because landing as close as he does to the site, I think it does a really good job establishing just how incidental the science is to him.
Yeah. It portrays a sort of cavalierness, I guess. Just a certain kind of recklessness that feels all about the spectacle, yeah?
Yeah.
So, John Hammond is here. He says, I own an island off the coast of Costa Rica. It's kind of a biological preserve, and our investors want an outside opinion. So if you can kind of come down, check it out, sign off in the park, everyone will be happy. You'll be happy because I'll finance your dig for the next 5 years. And they're like, yeah, that sounds good to us. I mean, they're not thrilled at first with how he kind of just gate crashes, but when he kind of dangles the
half a decade's worth of pay is a very big incentive.
So we cut out to a restaurant. I believe this is Costa Rica, where at a restaurant in Costa Rica where we've got Dennis Nedry, played by Wayne Knight, and he's meeting with a guy called Dodgson, and this is the famous Dodgson. We've got Dodgson here. See, nobody cares, because this guy shows up, in an outfit designed to hide his features, big hat and sunglasses. And the reason he's doing that is because he's offering Nedry $1.5 million to swipe a whole bunch of embryos from the embryo storage at Jurassic Park, conceal it in the false bottom of a can of shaving cream, so that this rival company to the Jurassic Park operation can catch up on all this research. So this is corporate espionage.
And I mean, my first question about this is, how the hell did this information get out to begin with? I don't understand how, if you have managed to clone a dinosaur, how it is that you managed to somehow let that information get out into the world to begin with.
Yeah, or I feel like it's either that, or you can ask, how was this not bigger news? How was this not known about in advance? Scientists tell people what they're working on all the time because they need funding. And publicity helps. So, I feel like it's either very hush-hush and you say nothing about this to anyone. This is top secret, or you're throwing this out to every news corporation that'll have you. I can't imagine that there's a whole lot of middle ground.
No, and if it's as hush as the movie is playing it up as, I don't understand why Dennis isn't being paid more.
Yeah, for sure. So now we're on the helicopter out to Jurassic Park, and we meet Dr. Malcolm, played to the hilt by Jeff Goldblum, in a role that will become very, very iconic, of course. And we learn about what he does. He is a mathematician who involved in, although he prefers the term chaotician, who is involved in chaos theory and nonlinear equations. And so it's him, the lawyer, Hammond, Dr. Grant, and Ellie Sattler who are on this chopper. And there's this beautiful sequence where they fly through these very lush canyons. Cinematography here is just great, and on the approach to the island. And we touch down, and there's some jeeps that pull into frame to pick them up from the helicopter landing pad, and this is our first look at the Jurassic Park logo, which pulls right into frame.
Also, I think it's important to point out that the scene is shot gorgeously, but it's also backed up with John Williams' score, and the man can do no wrong in this movie. All the music is just fantastic.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Okay, so everyone piles into the Jeep, and we go through several electrified fences on the way, and we in each of which are 10,000 volts. And the entire time, Hammond and the lawyer Gennaro are saying, okay, we've got all the electric fences installed, and a full 50 miles of fences, and the concrete moats and the motion sensors. So it sounds like, they're taking the security for this operation seriously. We will learn that all this isn't enough. Things do, in fact, go bad. But your initial impression, at least, I think, is supposed to be, oh, like this is like a really serious operation. As Hammond says, 48 hours from now, I'll be accepting all of your apologies for doubting me. Essentially. So the Jeeps pull up to this kind of wide open field, and this is just one of cinema's classic moments, I think. Like the first encounter with the Brachiosaurs is probably, in my estimation, kind of one of the most magical cinema moments. This is certainly something I just like one of the strongest visualizations from like a movie in my childhood. And Malcolm underscores that with, "You crazy son of a bitch, you did it."
Well, that also raises the question, how much did he know about this? Because that sounds as if he knew that they were doing something similar to this and he can't believe they pulled it off. But once again, this goes back to the secrecy thing.
Yeah, my interpretation of this has always been, like, he kind of knows it involves, like, genetic engineering of some sort. But he probably wasn't told the full details, so he might have had a suspicion, but I don't know. It's interesting. It's also interesting because Goldblum's character, who's going to be kind of very dour from this point out in the movie, I was kind of very skeptical of everything and generally displeased with everything that's going on. Even he can't help but smile at the first encounter with these creatures, right? Like, there is something actually, kind of genuinely beautiful and majestic about them. And Williams' score really sells that here as well. So, Grant and Hammond are talking, and he's like, how fast are they? And Hammond mentions that they've clocked the T-Rex at 32 miles an hour. This is also... Put a pin in that. We'll be revisiting that later. So Grant is like, how have you done this? And Hammond says, I'll show you. So we pull up to the visitor center at the atrium, and when they enter, we see this giant T-Rex skeleton that has a banner in front of it that says, "When dinosaurs ruled the earth." And now we have a cute little interactive presentation about all about the miracle of cloning, presented by Mr. DNA.
Oh my god, that scene went on a lot longer than I remember it being as a kid.
Yeah, that was my interpretation as well. Watching this movie again, I had kind of similar notes. Shocked at just how long the scene went on. I will say I think that it does a good job explaining the basics of DNA in, which is a fairly complicated process, pretty quickly. It actually, goes over how the dinosaur DNA was found. It was preserved in amber, and then they use gene sequencing technologies to fill in the holes in the dinosaur DNA, which were a bunch of incomplete samples. And it kind of goes over all that, I thought, in a fairly legible manner. What I think is interesting is if the scene feels like it goes on really long, I honestly just think that's kind of a tribute to how much more sophisticated your average moviegoer is nowadays. There's a lot of movies that just kind of expect you to know something about what DNA is and how it's processed, and a little about how genetic engineering might work. That's true of a lot of sci-fi movies now. This was not the case back in 1993.
Yeah, and also, for as long as it is, it's one of if not the only exposition scenes in the film. So it manages to, while it takes up a not insignificant chunk of time, it manages to give you just about all the information you need about why the dinosaurs are here, how the dinosaurs work. That will allow you to move forward for the rest of the film without having to bog the rest of it down with these explanations.
I think that's true, yeah. It's a great showcase in being concise, I guess, with a lot of of heavy exposition. So now we see a bunch of scientists, and the group undoes their safety restraints, which they're not really supposed to be able to do, to go see them. And so they walk into the lab. We also hear an announcement at this point that the last boat for the mainland is leaving soon. And we see an egg incubator and a little dinosaur hatching out of it. It's so cute. It's so adorable. Until Grant asks what species it is. And the scientist, Dr. Wu, very nonchalantly kind of is like, oh, that's Velociraptor. And Grant is like, you bred raptors? Very darkly.
You fool, I'm only supposed to be able to terrorize children with those. They're not supposed to be real.
Yeah. So they all kind of express their concern that, like, well, how do you prevent them from breeding in the wild? Like, isn't that a problem? And then Wu explains that, the animals can't breed in the wild. All of them are female. We control their chromosomes with genetic engineering. And this is when Malcolm is like, that's not gonna work. Like and Wu is very skeptically like, oh, you're implying that a bunch of female animals are gonna find some way to breed. And this is when Malcolm very famously says, no, I'm just saying that life finds a way. And
then they put a pin in that until what, the third movie?
No, until later in this movie.
Later in this, God. Is it later? It's, jeez, yeah. I watched too much Jurassic Park recently. I can't remember which one it's from.
Yeah. So, this is another great bit of foreshadowing in general. I think, it's kind of, Dr. Wu, who's clearly very confident in their ability to control DNA, which is this extremely complex thing. And Malcolm just been like, no, that's not gonna work. Sort of already building up the kind of theme of hubris that's gonna run through this film. So we cut out to the raptor pen, where they are lowering a cow into the pen to feed the raptors, and Hammond clearly does not want them to see this. He's trying to pull the group away from this. But for the audience, it's quite fortunate because we get some more off-screen demonstrations of how lethal these things are, and we don't actually see this. This is all heard, but they lower the cow into the pen where it's just ripped apart by these raptors, and that's when Muldoon comes out and says they should all be destroyed. And he goes on about how dangerous they are, that they can reach 50, 60 miles an hour out in the open, that they're extremely intelligent, and they test the fences for weakness systematically. This is also going to set up something later in the film, and we'll come back to this, but I feel like, given how much Muldoon knows about the raptors here, it's a little weird that he makes a mistake. Such a drastic mistake later on, but
I've always thought that was more just the raptors hearing him and putting a little note in their book about that guy's next.
Yeah. What's funny is there this kind of persistent threat all throughout the movie, but really it's not until like the third act. It's not until pretty late in the movie we actually get a good look at them, and at that point everything has of course just degraded and gone to shit. Do you feel like they built this one out too long, or do you think the amount of anticipation?
I think the raptors are just about one of the scariest things in this whole movie. So personally, I think that the raptors get about almost exactly what they need in order to sell their presence. And it also makes sense considering the fact that there are several dinosaur threats in this movie, but the two big ones are the raptors and the Tyrannosaurus Rex. And the Tyrannosaurus Rex really doesn't need much building up.
Yeah.
It's big and scary, and it looks like a dragon without wings. So spending as much, it gives, because that's this giant monster that they don't really need to explain why it's scary that much, it really let them dig into the raptors and these smaller, more pack-oriented animals and explain why it is that they will be given an equal threat level to the Tyrannosaurus Rex.
Yeah, I suppose so. I guess you need you need to kind of build. You need to build an argument for why they're badass in a way that you don't the Rex.
Yeah, and I think that might be something that it's easy for us to understand why the raptors are scary. We've seen Jurassic Park before.
So now they're all sitting around.
I did have one more note about
lunch.
this. Just the transition from the raptor enclosure to lunch, I found fascinating because it's once again an example of how the lead scientist, what's his name? The guy who runs the park.
The guy who runs the park, John Hammond.
John Hammond, yeah. It's another example of his disconnect, in my opinion, and one of the things that, like, how he's sort of disconnected from reality, because these people just heard this cow get torn apart in horrible ways, and his reaction is, who wants lunch?
Yeah, certainly a little bit tone deaf. Yeah, and on that point, now they're all sitting around having lunch, and Malcolm's like, there's such a massive danger in what you're doing here. Genetic power is the most influential science on the face of the planet, and you wield it like a kid who's found his dad's gun. And he tells them that one of the issues is that they didn't take any effort to get the knowledge for themselves, so that they don't bear any responsibility for it, which is kind of weird. You had notes on this, yeah?
Yeah, I definitely noted this speech. His whole "you stood on the shoulders of giants" sequence I find really interesting because every scientist stands on the shoulders of giants, and I totally see what he's going for. I see, like, the theme of irresponsibility he's trying to get at, and the rhetoric is interesting, but it's at the same time, this is how science is made. People make discoveries and they make breakthroughs, and then that breakthrough is built upon by someone else taking the next step.
Yeah, I'd agree. Yeah, it almost sounds like, he's arguing that they need to do it from scratch in order to be responsible for it. But that's it. To my mind, that how they get the knowledge that they use is sort of a separate question from how is it being applied? This might be dangerous and unethical, but it's that's sort of a separate question from standing on the shoulders of giants, as you said.
And I feel like if you're going to make the argument that they didn't do enough of the work to, like, wield this knowledge responsibly, if you're going to make that, if the movie wanted to make that argument stronger, they probably should have given us, I don't know how they could have done this, but given us a base idea of where they started from. Because all we know is that they took the DNA and they cloned it from that little presentation they did, but it doesn't really tell us, like, who were the ones who made the initial breakthrough, for example.
Yeah, and this is something we'll get into later, is the differences between this movie and the ideas in the book, which are kind of subtly different. But yeah, that's definitely a good point. And Ellie also has a point here about, like, how can you know anything about how an extinct ecosystem functions? Yeah, that which I also feel like is kind of a weird way of phrasing it. Like, you can definitely learn things about an extinct ecosystem. Whether or not you can learn enough to want to recreate it in its entirety is I think a good question. But just being like, how do you learn anything about an extinct ecosystem?
Absolutely. And I think the other thing to keep in mind about all of this is that this is all nitpicks on a very, very good movie whose first and foremost intent wasn't necessarily to make this the most scientifically rigorous movie of all time or anything. They were trying to have a lot of fun with some giant dinosaurs. For sure.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And on the note of fun with giant dinosaurs, it's about time for the dinosaur tour. The group heads out, kind of finishes up lunch, and they head out to the tour vehicles, which run on a track system. And here we're introduced to John Hammond's grandkids, Tim and Lex. Lex kind of gets to display her knowledge of computer systems. Another bit of foreshadowing there. While Tim harasses Grant about his book. This particular sequence here where it's one long shot and we follow Tim and Grant as they jump in and out of cars, and Grant literally shuts the door in Tim's face.
Only for the granddaughter to be sitting there in the car right next to him as he closes the door.
Yeah.
I was just thinking to myself that if my significant other was unsure about having children, I don't know how well the events of this film would convince me to reconsider that. Like, nothing against Sattler's, like, obviously she can't know just how disastrous everything goes, but this is just a very amusing thing for me, because it's like, I'm going to have to look after these kids during the worst day of my life. Oh, boy.
Oh, yeah, that's right. She says something like, Lex says that Ellie asks her to sit with Grant because it would, quote-unquote, be good for him. And
Exactly,
and
yes.
the weird thing is about that is she's kind of right, but in, like, the worst possible way.
Yeah. Her plan should not have worked, and it somehow did.
Yeah, the tour has to get underway, like, kind of immediately, because we learn that a tropical storm is advancing on the island. Samuel L. Jackson's character is like, hold on to your butts, and he starts the tour, and we see it drive through the very famous Jurassic Park gate, giant wooden gate that has torches on the side of it. Malcolm's, what do you got in there, King Kong? Which, I guess, at this point, fair, like they could. So, the first exhibit, the first kind of animal is the Dilophosaurus, but they just don't show up. I'm not sure if it's meant to imply that they've kind of camouflaged and they're hiding. That's kind of the vibe I get, but I'm not sure.
I mean, animals just sometimes don't oblige you and show up on tour. It happens.
Yeah, for sure. Back at the visitor center, Mr. Arnold, that's Samuel Jackson's character, is continuing to add glitches to a glitch list. That this is made worse by the fact that a lot of those systems are completely automated. They've got all of these automated systems having these various glitches, which raises a question.
Which is like one of Hammond's catchphrases. Completely automated, spared no expense.
Yeah, spared no expense. Except that they do seem to have spared expenses, because why is Nedry their only tech guy? Like, I don't... Because they turn to him, and Hammond turns to him. Our lives are in your hands, and you've got Butterfingers. And this prompts Nedry to go on this rant about, do you know how much work I had to do to get this place running, like, up and running, so it can, like, self-sustain and be automated? That's kind of a fair question. Like, it really should be, at least I feel like, a team. I've got one guy coding the system for this entire park. Certainly seems inadvisable.
Yeah, I mean, everything around Nedry just feels like there were several ways that they could have avoided almost the entirety of this movie, and most of them involve treating Nedry slightly better. Like, I'm not saying he's a great guy. He's not. He sells the company out and all that.
Absolutely,
but, like,
yeah.
Apparently they're not paying him enough. The guy obviously doesn't get along with Hammond at all. So it just feels like there was a lot of circumstances that were involved in making this one guy decide to jump ship in the most spiteful way possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And that's seems to be like another kind of a difference between the book and the movie. Is in the movie, Nedry's actions kind of drastically alter everything. Like, he's responsible for taking down the fences and everything. Whereas in the book, I believe it's implied that they were already losing control of the park. Nedry's actions merely kind of expedited that process. So they're now approaching the Tyrannosaurus, and this goat comes out of the ground and it just sits there for now. You know, the T-Rex doesn't want to be fed. He wants to hunt, as Grant says. And they try and lure the Rex out, but again, it doesn't show up. And to sort of underscore that point, Malcolm has a conversation with Ellie Sattler about the essence of chaos, the butterfly effect, basically, which argues that complex systems are inherently unpredictable. So, you know, even if you've got this method of luring the Rex up to the fence where people can see it, there's no guarantee that's going to work. Just to add on to that, Grant sees a Triceratops out the window and just jumps out of the vehicle because the door locks on the Jeeps don't work. Yeah, yeah. So the tour is brought to a halt while the group goes to see the dinosaurs, and we also have another shot of Nedry here, kind of looking at the monitors and rather ominously planning his betrayal. Speeding up here a bit, we have the scene where they encounter the Triceratops, which is sick, and Ellie suspects it's because of something that it ate, which is local plant life, which is West Indian lilac. And I think this, again, is supposed to kind of reinforce how difficult it is to predict these things. So we also learned that the storm hasn't dissipated or even changed course, so the tour has to be cut short and picked up tomorrow.
Which would be a lot easier to do if they hadn't all jumped out of the tour bus.
Yeah. So Ellie says that she's gonna stay with Park's veterinarian, Dr. Harding, while the others get back in their vehicles and continue the tour, continue riding it back to the visitor center. So the storm has also cut Nedry's timetable short, and so if he's got to act, he's got to act now. And he cuts the power to a lot of the park's systems. He breaks into the embryo storage and swipes the embryos and loads them into the can of shaving cream. I just really like the lighting in the scene. It's very atmospheric. You've got these kind of cold storage devices that cast off this really eerie kind of blue glow. So all the fences around the park are going down. He's powered them all down except for the raptor fences. He's turned off all the other fences so he can cut through the park to get to the dock. So he goes out to one of the Jeeps and drives out towards the dock, and he smashes into the sign for the dock. So he's no longer sure which way he's going. Back at the visitor center control room, Hammond and Arnold notice that all the fences are down and that the radios are out and that the vehicles have stalled near the Tyrannosaurus Rex paddock. And John Arnold tries to retake control of the system, basically, and turn all that stuff back on. And this is when we have some very impressive hacker crap, in his words, where we have a little animated GIF of Nedry saying, you didn't say the magic word.
His final middle finger.
Yeah.
And I don't know much about coding. Is what he did at all impressive, actually, or is that just things that look impressive because we're not all coders?
I'm sure it would probably be fairly trivial to write a program that, where if the user enters the wrong password or the wrong command a few times in a row, it plays an annoying audio clip along with like a visual GIF. That would be fairly trivial. I the more kind of sinister thing about it is that's just kind of an extremely unprofessional thing to do. And it doesn't help anyone else who's potentially interacting with that system figure out what the problem is, which again would be an issue if the park had hired anyone but Nedry, right? Still a fantastic scene. Just kind of one of the cinema greats.
Just to draw on Wayne Knight's like he's got quite a backlog of great stuff behind him. But every time I see that little GIF show up for the first time, I just imagine in Seinfeld just going, Newman!
Yeah. So, the vehicles have stalled out near the Rex paddock because they're no longer powered to move along the track. Tim finds a pair of night vision goggles, and he's looking around through the fence.
Once again, I find this to be an interesting example of where they chose to put the budget for this park. They can't afford to make the car doors lock, but every van has a pair of night vision goggles in it. Are they planning on having night tours that frequently?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a fantastic question. The emergency flares in the back I get, right?
Basic safety.
Yeah, but the NVGs, I'm like, I don't understand. All right. But I really love the look of this entire scene. The rain effects here are just great. They make the Rex itself look amazing.
I mean, you were talking about iconic scenes, and like, this is it for me. This is the Jurassic Park scene. When I think of Jurassic Park, I think of this scene stuck in this claustrophobic Jeep as a T-Rex slowly advances on you.
Absolutely, yeah. And the vibrations in the water cup are just such a fantastic touch. It's maybe a little bit cheesy, but it's also just a great way of heightening the kind of the tension. And as is the fact that the goat is gone now. Tim looks through the NVGs at where the goat was, and it's gone. And he's like, "Where's the goat?" Then, just a split second later, this bloody limb hits the top of the car. Now we've got our first good look at the Rex, which happens to be resting its arm on the fence. Obviously, is not a good thing, since that implies the power is out. And the lawyer, Gennaro, freaks out and runs to the bathroom. And Malcolm's like, when you gotta go, you gotta go. So the Rex rips the fence down, and again, just some fantastic cinematography here. The Rex looks amazing between the two cars, and the angle really helps sell its size. Reminder that this isn't CG, this is a practical effect. It's an entire T-Rex robot that they built. So really understanding how to, just from a filmmaking standpoint, really understanding how to light and film it from the angles to really maximize its size. Yeah, it's just fantastic.
Yeah, as someone who always prefers practical effects whenever possible over CG, the Tyrannosaurus Rex really does sell just the puppet sells the terror of the Tyrannosaurus Rex, and it is just a fantastic bit of mechanical engineering.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So the Rex rips down the fence, and this is when Grant says that they need to stay still and stop moving around because its vision is based on movement.
Also, how do we know that?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
I mean,
I'm not sure.
The eyeball does not survive petrification, and I'm assuming that's how you would learn that, is by examining the eyeball.
Yeah, I honestly couldn't tell you. I think that, he's maybe just extrapolating based off of what we know about modern day a similar species, but yeah, I'm not totally sure. Now, Lex turns on the spotlight, turns on this massive, this gigantic flashlight for some reason. I'm really not sure what the logic here was, but I mean, hey, she's panicking. I get it. It's a massive T-Rex. I mean, my logical brain says don't do anything that's going to draw its attention to you, but, who knows how I'd act in that situation. But in either case, the result is that the Rex tries to flip the car over. It starts smashing its head into it, and it flips the Jeep, Lex and Tim are in over, and it rips off the wheels of the first car. Grant tries to distract the Rex by activating one of the emergency flares that was in the back, and he throws it to distract it. Malcolm tries to do the same to give Grant time to rescue the kids, but he's chased by the T-Rex. I think it sort of body slams into him, and it launches him through the air. He kind of comes down under some palm fronds, and where he's presumably knocked unconscious for a while. The Rex batters down the bathroom and eats the lawyer.
Yes. Cinema 1, lawyers 0.
Yeah, right? Yeah. This does feel a little bit cheesy. How everything falls away except for, the toilet that he's sitting on. Seems a little convenient, but...
Oh, it absolutely is, but it's also, in a movie that's leaning into the spooky in the way that Jurassic Park is. It's never the scariest movie on the planet, but it is trying to be tense and suspenseful. This has always felt to me more like a comic scene than anything else, especially because the lawyers have been getting bad-mouthed all film and set up as the designated punching bag.
I suppose so. Yeah. Grant pulls Lex out of the car, but Tim is still in the vehicle as the Rex pushes it over an edge and it falls into these trees below. So now we're back with Muldoon and Hammond at the visitor center control room, and Hammond asks Muldoon to go out in a jeep and rescue the others. We also check back in with Nedry, who has run off the road and managed to get his jeep stuck on like a downed tree. And he tries to use a winch by tying the winch around a tree to free it. This is when he gets his comeuppance. He encounters a dinosaur, a Dilophosaurus, when trying to attach the winch to the tree, and it sprays this venom at him, which initially just kind of gets in his face. He staggers back into the vehicle, but he has not closed the door, so there's another one in his Jeep, and it attacks him and kills him, and he drops the can of shaving cream here. So let that be a lesson to you. Don't just leave your door open if you have to leave your car for whatever reason. There's always a chance that a rogue Dilophosaur will find its way in.
I mean, there are a million other reasons why you may need to make sure your car is locked, or closed, but now we've got another one, I guess. Rogue dinosaurs.
Grant climbs the tree now and finds Tim in the car. He pulls him out of the seat of the car. They accidentally move the steering wheel, which causes the position of the wheels to shift and the car to begin falling through the tree, like as they descend it. But, they get out of the tree all right. Once they're on the ground, the car, the broken frame of it, lands on them again, but they're fine because they're back in the interior of the vehicle. So Ellie and Muldoon arrive at the Tyrannosaurus paddock, where they find Malcolm and they put him in the rear of the Jeep. We have a redux of the impact tremor, like the vibrations in the water. This time it's a puddle. Not quite as spooky as the first time, but still very impactful. I liked the Jeep chase scene, where the Rex actually chases the car, and they're able to outrun it. And you've got this great bit of visual humor where Muldoon is looking in his side mirror at the Rex, and it's got the objects in the mirror are closer than they appear, a sticker on it. So I thought that's a nice visual gag.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Now Tim and Lex and Grant climb this tree to rest for the night, and they spot a Brachiosaurus, and we have this nice little scene of them bonding, and Tim tells a joke here, and Grant actually laughs at it, and we see that he's undergoing a character arc. I guess, almost being killed.
Has reminded him that there are much worse things than kids.
Yeah. It probably really puts your problems in perspective. Maybe you might find children annoying, but they are at least not life-threatening. Not typically, anyway, I guess. I shouldn't speak. There might be some children out there who have mastered ninjutsu or something, but,
I can't go outside. The kid's got throwing stars.
So Ellie meets with Hammond in the cafeteria, and you have this scene where he tells her about the first attraction he ever built was a flea circus, and he talks about how it's all an illusion, and like so much of entertainment is just an illusion. He wanted to show people something that was actually real, something like amazing that was actually real. That's more of like a sympathetic look at this character than his character in the book, who is very arrogant and I think power mad in a way that Hammond in the movie isn't. But, Ellie argues the mistake was assuming that they had control over the system in the first place. Everyone's going to have to reckon with that fact now. So, Grant and Tim and Lex come down from the tree, and they find dinosaur eggs, which implies that they were, in fact, breeding after all. Son of a bitch, Malcolm was right. Life found a way. You can pull that pin down now from your chart.
A little quicker than I thought I would be pulling it down, but yes, the eggs. I'm trying to remember, wasn't this because, didn't they mention like frog DNA as being part of what they used for the dinosaurs? Yes.
Grant explains that. He says that part of the way they filled in the holes in the incomplete dinosaur DNA was they used amphibian DNA, and certain West African frogs are able to change sex in a single-sex environment. So that's kind of implied to be the reason. that they were actually able to breed. Now we're back at the visitor center, and they need to do a hard reboot of the system. Shut it down, and all the systems should come back on, in theory. They mentioned the lysine contingency here. Arnold explains that the dinosaurs are unable to produce the amino acid lysine, and unless provided with it by the Jurassic Park staff, they will slip into a coma and die. Small problem. The amino acid lysine is actually extremely common and is in, almost everything. Like, I don't know if that was, like, an intentional oversight or what, but, yeah, I guess that could be more evidence for their not understanding their control mechanisms as well as they think they do. So, Samuel L. Jackson gets to say, hold on to your butts, again. He powers everything off and turns it back on. It works. Everything's in the dark, but now all they need to do is restore power to the park now that it's in startup mode again. He's going to go off to the emergency bunker where the power is rebooted from. This isn't really explained in the movie, because we know that Nedry left the power to the raptor pen on. I'm assuming that this is what lets the raptors out. Is this hard reboot of the system that they have to do. They have now interrupted power to everything, basically. And at some point the raptors realize that.
I mean, that's absolutely a possibility. The raptors have been, as they said, have been testing the perimeters. So it is entirely possible that when the hard reboot happens, they were just testing the perimeters, and all of a sudden, hey, there's an exit.
Yeah, that would be my guess. So
either that, or more disturbingly, they'd already found a way out, and it just coincided with the park shutdown.
Yeah. We have an encounter where Tim and Grant and Lex see a bunch of Gallimimus. I don't know what the plural that is, Gallimime. And we see the Rex kind of burst out of the jungle and attack them. It's a pretty cool scene, admittedly. It's also fairly inconsequential to the story. The most important thing here is that Mr. Arnold has been gone for a while, and much longer than he should have been, and Ellie's worried about him, so she volunteers to go out to the shed herself and get the power started again. This is when Muldoon grabs a shotgun and goes with her. Sure enough, when we see that the raptors have breached containment and gotten out of their enclosure. Muldoon says, we can't make it there, we're being hunted. He volunteers to kind of stay behind and draw aggro while Ellie runs for the shed. So Lex, Tim, and Grant also come across the electrical fence at the same time, and they have to climb it while Ellie is in the process of resetting the breaker boxes.
And Grant tempts
powering
fate
everything
hard.
back on. So they have this really tense scene of the power about to be restored to the fence while Tim is still trying to climb down it, and he's electrocuted and then blasted off of it. And I laughed at that because I'm a terrible person. He's given CPR by Grant, and he's fine for the most part. I do appreciate that he's now bleeding from the ear for the rest of the movie, so it's not like he got out of that unscathed. He's limping for the rest of the movie as well. A lot of movies will just they'll portray some sort of physical trauma, something that necessitates CPR happening to a character, and then they're fine afterwards. That's not really the case here. So
Yeah, no, that one looked like it hurt, and it had some consequences. Also, I bet Grant's feeling like a real asshole after that.
Oh yeah, he's got this thing where he fakes them out, where he grabs onto the electrical fence and pretends to be being electrocuted. Lex is like, that's not funny, and Tim's like, that was great.
Gotta love irony.
So Ellie is now attacked by one of the raptors. After she finishes rebooting the power, she's attacked by one of the raptors at the power shed. This is actually the first time we see the raptors in the entire movie. First time we get a good look at them. And it just kind of bursts through this chain link fence and kind of lunges at her. Yeah, this was really jarring. This actually caught me off guard on a rewatch, even. I don't know, just something about how the scene is structured. You're not like she finds Mr. Arnold's arm, and it's severed, and obviously he's been eaten. I guess it's the shock of that revelation followed by the immediate shock again of the raptor just coming through the wall at her. That's a very nice bit of event structuring there.
Yeah, the scene is really well structured and really well paced from beginning to end, right from like the hand going down onto Sadler's arm, onto her shoulder.
Mm-hmm. Now we're back with Muldoon again, who's hunting the raptors, but unfortunately for him, the hunter has become the hunted, because, as Grant alluded to early in the movie, the attack doesn't come from the front, but from the sides. A raptor pops out at him, and he's like, "Oh, clever girl." This is kind of a nice bit of characterization as well, I should say. You know, that's 2 words, but it tells you a lot about who he is as a person, basically. Like, he knows he's done for, but even at that moment, he can't, like, kind of help but have this grudging respect for it.
Yeah, he's impressed. Even as he knows he's screwed, he's impressed by it. You'd said something earlier about having something to want to say about this.
Oh, just that, this is the payoff for Grant's whole discussion at the beginning of the movie with that kid. However, it always did strike me as a little bit strange that Muldoon, who displays, when he's introduced, he displays this great awareness and intelligence of the raptors and what their behavior patterns are like. So it's interesting that he doesn't see this coming. But then, you know what I realized? He's probably never gotten the chance to see them hunt, actually, because, again, they're fed with this sort of really artificial process of lowering, like, a cow into their enclosure. So if he had actually gotten to, like, witness, take something down, like, out in the field, he might have known that this was going to happen. But, again, because they're sort of fencing them in and kind of denying them this aspect of their nature, they sort of pay the price for it, which is an interesting...
That actually raises another question about, like, the hunting tactics that they get. Are those instinctual, or are those something that they're taught from as a child? Because these raptors don't have parents, per se, to teach them how to hunt.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that they still know how to use these tactics.
Which definitely implies that it's instinctual. So Grant, Tim, and Lex now make it back to the visitor center, where they eat the food that had been set out for them earlier. Grant and Nellie reunite outside of the visitor center. And this is also a nice bit of cinematography, is while Lex and Tim are just sort of chowing down the remains of this buffet that was set out, Lex sees the shadow of the raptor on the wall of the visitor center. And again, we're stretching out the tension here. I believe we still haven't gotten, like, a full body look at the raptors at this point. We've seen a little bit more of them, but they're still kind of attacking out of foliage in the case of Muldoon's death, or they're kind of obscured by, like, darkness of the power shed in the case of the one that attacks Ellie. Yeah, we still haven't gotten, like, a great look at them yet. So they escape into the kitchen where they hide from the raptors, and we have a very tense scene here where one of the raptors stalks them in the kitchen, and they can open doors, by the way, because the door handles are not knobs. They're the levers that you press down on. Our cat can do this. So, like, if you work in a place where there is any suspicion at all that some sort of non-human can open a door, get doorknobs.
Curses, my one weakness, a doorknob.
So the Raptors opens the door, and then it calls for its friends to come help search with this really eerie, high-pitched squeal. And we have a very intense scene of the Raptors hunting the kids down in the kitchen. And we've got a really, really cool shot of the Raptor closing out on Lex's reflection in one of the cabinets. And it kind of pounces at her, but it turns out it's her reflection. And it smashes its head on this cabinet and stuns itself for a bit. Tim runs into the freezer room and tricks the raptor that was there into locking it in the freezer. So now they reunite with Grant and Ellie in the computer control room. And the door locks still aren't working, and Grant and Ellie are trying to hold this door closed, while Lex uses her skills to find the door locks. She's like, I know this. This is a Unix system.
That line.
Yeah. Now, here's the crazy thing. This bizarre system of navigating system files where it's like flying through like a digital landscape where there's just a whole bunch of icons. That's apparently a real thing. There was apparently a real like system someone developed at some point, and for the life of me, I cannot imagine why. How is that any more efficient than just looking at a list of icons?
I don't know. Was that something designed for Unix? I'm just curious if there's internal consistency there for that.
Yeah. A lot of people like expected that to be like fake, but no, that's like a real thing.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot to be said about this movie and scientific accuracy and where it's accurate, where it's not. That is not the place I expected scientific accuracy.
Yeah, it's bizarre.
I still think, oh my god, this is a Unix system is probably the worst line in the movie.
Yeah. There's certainly a kind of look how cool my elite hacker cred is. But, Lex uses her computer skills to find the door locks and reboot the entire system. So the door locks are working again, the phones are working again, and Grant calls Hammond and tells him to call the mainland and have them send helicopters. The Raptors burst through the glass here, and so the group heads up into the air vents, into the duct system, which fortunately for them is very spacious.
When I was in high school, I had a teacher who referred to air vents like that as Willis ducts, because they were air ventilation ducts just large enough for Bruce Willis to crawl through.
Yeah, right. There's a really interesting lighting effect that happens here. If you look at the light that's shining on the Raptors, it's made out of a bunch of little G, A, C, and T letters, and I'm not sure how this light is getting in there. I think it's being projected by something in the room. It's a really interesting effect, and of course has kind of a thematic meaning. They open up the vent and they emerge out onto the scaffolding above the skeletons of the T-Rex here, which begins to fall apart as they climb down onto it. They eventually all land on kind of the floor of the atrium, and the two raptors emerge from different sides, and they pen them in. And just when the situation's looking very dire for them all, the Rex bursts into the atrium and
proves its main character status once again.
And distracts them long enough to where the group can escape. And it gets in a fight with them and it kills the two of them. One of them it kills by picking up and flinging it into the skeleton. Then it roars. The little banner that says "When dinosaurs ruled the earth" detaches from the ceiling, comes fluttering down while this happens. And it is incredibly cheesy, but incredibly awesome at the same time.
It is so cool. I love that scene so much. That is just that is so much fun and that is pure Jurassic Park. I think that's the scene that most people think of when they think of Jurassic Park.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point about the Rex rubbing its main character status all over them, funny story, this movie was actually supposed to end a little bit differently. Rather than having the Rex show up and fight the Raptors, Grant would have cut the cables holding the skeleton up, and it would have fallen to the floor and crushed the Raptors beneath it. But at the last moment, Spielberg was like, no, that can't be the way it ends. We've got to see the Rex one more time. It's the star of this movie. So they rewrote the ending. But definitely for the better.
Absolutely.
Hammond shows up in the Jeep and along with Malcolm, and picks the rest of them up. They jump into the Jeep and drive out to the helipad. And here, Grant is like, Mr. Hammond, after thinking about it, I've decided not to endorse Jurassic Park. And Hammond's like, so have I. Showing that he's a changed man, right?
Finally learned his lesson.
Yeah. So the group escapes on the helicopters, and we see that Grant has bonded with the kids because they're both kind of leaning on him. Yeah, the helicopter flies off into the sunset, and we get the credits with the epic John Williams score. So you have any closing thoughts on the film?
I mean, it's a cinema classic for a reason. It's tense. The action is great. The effects and the music are stunning. Aside from the joking nitpicks that we can throw at it, 20 odd years later, however long it's been, the movie is still Jurassic Park.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it really does hold up. I think even a lot of the visual effects in this movie are still surprisingly good.
Yeah, the CG hasn't aged super well in my opinion, but I'm also really picky about CG. But I think all of the practical effects look really good to this day.
I think some of the CG has aged better than others. Like the Gallimimus encounter looks especially rough. Some of the raptor animation is also kind of rough. But the scene, maybe it's just because they're so much larger and they move a lot slower. I think the encounter with the Brachiosaurus still holds up, even though they're CG.
I think a lot of it has to do with the distance that you see the Brachiosaurus at first. The closer you get to CG, the worse it looks, and it still doesn't look perfect, but the distance makes it look significantly better.
Absolutely.
And I'm still very grateful that the up close of the Brachiosaurus is a practical effect.
Definitely. Yeah, I also just thought in general, it's this might be one of the few movies that I think I genuinely enjoy more than the book that it's based on.
I've never read the book, so I can't speak to that, but I'll take your word for it.
I think, like I was saying, there's some substantial changes made from the book. For one, Hammond is a much more unlikable character. He's kind of deeply petulant, really arrogant. He even has a bit where like he's already planning for take 2 at like the park before the danger is even settled yet. While the bodies count is still racking up, he's already like planning out his next attempt.
Well, I mean, they still have that in the movie. There's that dinner scene that he has with Statler where he says next time.
Yeah, but he learns from that.
He does.
And in the book, that isn't true. Actually, he's killed by like some Compsognathuses, and he just dies being kind of a shitty person.
Really, I did not know he died in the book.
Yeah, and the tone of the book, I think, is in general comes off as just, I don't know, much more kind of technophobic, because it not only is it just the genetic engineering angle that's pushed really hard, like kind of like this evil system, but also just all the problems with automation, and I think those ideas are kind of still there in the movie, but I think the book seems to take a much harder edge against it, whereas in the movie it's more like, this is something we need to be really careful about, that scientific discovery isn't something inherently negative, but just when you're using things that have this much power, it needs to be done with a great amount of care, which the book is much more dismissive of overall, I think. So that's also one of the reasons that I like the movie a little more. So there's that. And of course, like all the kind of classic cinema scenes in it that have contributed to kind of this shared language of cinema, and has just gone on to influence pop culture across the board. I just respect the hell out of this movie for everything that it's contributed to the legacy of sci-fi. Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. It is still a classic to this day.
How did you so how do you feel about real quick, how do you feel about the second the other movies?
Whew, boy. Well, I haven't watched the sequels to this one recently. I probably should take another look at those again. But the Chris Pratt movies are forgettable in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. I kind of like the first one. I kind of like the first Jurassic World. Yeah, not a big fan of the second one.
I Yeah, no, not for me.
All right. Well, that's Jurassic Park. Uh, we're going to take a quick break, and then in the show's second half, we're going to dive into the science behind cloning, genetic modification, and de-extinction overall. So, if you're interested in that, please stick around.
Now we're gonna dive into some of the science behind Jurassic Park. We're gonna take a look some of the science behind cloning and de-extinction, and figure out how that all works. But first, let me kind of take a moment to set the scene. So it's June of 1993. And the science journal Nature has just published this article detailing a new discovery about some weevil DNA that's over 100 million years old, entitled The Amplification and Sequencing of DNA from a 120 to 135 million year old weevil. It reports that tissues from these insects have been extracted and the DNA is of good quality, and it could be amplified by some DNA analysis techniques and then potentially sequenced. This happens the same week that Jurassic Park comes out in theaters.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. Hell of a coincidence. But, I think that's just a great example of how science and science fiction often collide in real-world settings and often boost one another and can even influence each other. And I should say that the book Jurassic Park was obviously written prior to this study being published, but it's not like Michael Crichton pulled this idea out of thin air. There were many scientists working on similar projects prior to this. As far back as 1982, there was a study that examined the remains of a fossil fly found in amber, thought to be approximately 40 million years old at the time. And a colleague of that research team suggested that it might be possible to extract DNA from the specimen and provide scientists with the DNA of an ancient creature for the first time. So, certainly Crichton was aware of everything that was going on in the scientific community in the run-up to the publishing of the book while he was writing it. And that takes us rather neatly into the actual technology behind the cloning and process of de-extinction that we see in the book and the movie. So,
is that the actual term for this, de-extinction?
Yes. Thanks for the clarification there. That is what they refer to it as, and there's a few different methods of de-extinction. If you're thinking about different ways to bring back an extinct species, there's a few different methods you can use to accomplish this. One is cloning, another is genome editing, there's also backbreeding, and iterative evolution. And to just kind of detail each of those a little bit, I suspect most people are familiar with the concept of cloning. You just take the nucleus from a preserved cell from an extinct species, and you put it into an egg without a nucleus. That's typically like the nearest living relative of whatever species you're targeting, right? Or you would use kind of an artificial womb, though these aren't totally reliable yet. This can only be done if enough of the cell is preserved, so it's not feasible for all but the most recently extinct species. But, cloning's been happening since the 1950s. It's so funny to think that cloning seems like this crazy kind of futuristic science, but it's been experimenting with it for 70 years now. I don't know. maybe that just points to the fact that I'm getting old. Yeah. I certainly think of it as like something that's super high tech and sci-fi, but it's been going on for quite a while.
This doesn't have much to do with anything else, but when I was a kid, I got fooled by an April Fool's newspaper article that said that woolly mammoths had successfully been cloned, and I was so excited about that I brought it into elementary school with me, and I got laughed at so hard.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. That's we'll put a pin in that for a little bit later here, but woolly mammoths are one of the species that they've been talking about putting through this process of de-extinction, and they've been talking about it for a while, mind you. So we'll see how likely it is to actually occur. But I was also similarly tricked by an April Fool's Day article featuring the cloning of like passenger pigeons. So. So yeah, that's understandable.
I'm glad that you can share in my humiliation.
Yeah. So that's cloning. The next way you could de-extinct a species is through genome editing. Again, the editing of the genome, we've been researching this for many years, but a lot of breakthroughs have been occurring very rapidly in recent years thanks to this thing called CRISPR. Or Cas9 genome editing.
I know that phrase.
Yeah. There's a lot of buzz about this a few years ago. Briefly, this essentially works by the regions of DNA are clustered together in these sort of short sequences. So yeah, this Cas9 CRISPR system was discovered as part of a bacterial immune system. Essentially, viral DNA is able to replicate itself by injecting, like viruses are able to replicate by injecting their own DNA into bacterial chromosomes at specific regions. And then this DNA is transcribed into an RNA sequence, and then this Cas9 protein is essentially utilized to splice the genome at a very specific spot in that RNA sequence and then edit it. So this means that effectively scientists take this viral DNA process and have adapted it to be able to cut and splice apart sections of the genome and plug other things into the DNA sequence. This discovery enables them to do it much more quickly and easily than ever before, really. And it's probably the only way we'll ever see a quote-unquote true dinosaur. This gets much more difficult the more degraded the DNA is. And certainly the DNA that any dinosaur DNA is very old and degraded. So the genome assembly is quite challenging, but there are people actually working on these projects. And in fact, this is a great time to bring up a man named Jack Horner. Horner is a real-life paleontologist. He served as one of the inspirations for the character of Dr. Grant in the movie and book, and he was actually technical advisor for all the Jurassic Park films, and apparently had a cameo in Jurassic World.
Really?
Yes. So this guy, Horner, is actually pursuing the use of genome editing to create a hybrid sort of a dinosaur-like species, which he describes as a chickenosaurus, using the genome of chickens as a starting point, since birds are the closest thing we have to dinosaurs, directly descended from dinosaurs.
Oh, how the mighty have fallen.
Yeah. In 2014, he and his team conducted some research into the embryonic development of tails. And in 2015, they apparently had found a way to turn the beaks of chicken embryos back into more dinosaur-like snouts via the process of this genetic engineering. So it's just kind of hilarious that he's technical advisor to all the Jurassic Park movies, which portray the horrific consequences of genetic engineering, and yet he's still like, yeah, let's do this.
I mean, the siren call of the T-Rex is very strong. I get it.
Yeah, right? I sympathize, but am at once a little concerned. So, apparently they've, been working on editing the genome to produce more dinosaur-like teeth, snouts, and tails. And one of the issues they're grappling with now is how to take the very short, stubby tail we see in most birds and reverse engineer it into the long tail of the dinosaurs. So that's genome editing. There's also this process of backbreeding. This is basically just selective breeding. This is obviously extremely common. Humans have been selectively breeding life forms for hundreds of years now. I mean, great examples, of course, being plants and dogs. Just all the various breeds of dog are just a really great illustration of this process. But backbreeding involves breeding animals intentionally for ancestral characteristics that aren't seen throughout modern species. So backbreeding is a form of artificial selection, in which we select animals with certain phenotypes, and then we try and influence the direction of the species to more resemble like a wild type ancestor. In this case, one that has gone extinct. And then there's certain edge cases. An edge case would be of de-extinction is what they call iterative evolution. This process is when a species goes extinct, but then just naturally, over the process of time, a different species evolves into basically the same identical creature, or almost identical creature, a very similar species. This has happened throughout history. Just environmental pressures often create species that are very similar to each other. In particular, natural selection seems to have a strong preference for crab-like things. We don't know why, but there's countless instances of different evolutionary branches ending up with something that resembles a crab.
Honestly, that kind of makes sense to me.
Yeah?
Yeah, crabs have adapted very well to their environment. The hard shell makes them hard to get to. The pinchers are good for picking things up, as well as, I'm assuming, defense. And their basic design, with the way the legs are set out, lets them move really quickly in their environments.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're very adaptable. They can live on both land and in water. That's certainly true. So, yes, briefly, those are the four different types of de-extinction. Jurassic Park, of course, deals primarily with cloning, which is done through reconstructing the DNA of the extinct species, and then using a natural type or a close living relative to that creature, and then implanting it with an embryo or using some sort of artificial womb. So, yeah, could this actually happen in real life? Is cloning dinosaurs on the docket? Well, to answer that, we're essentially going to have to briefly cover DNA. So, just a brief primer on DNA here. It was initially thought that DNA had a half-life of around 521 years, and which would mean...
Hold up a
Huh?
sec. Sorry, I know what you mean. I know what half-life means in the context of radiation. What does half-life mean in the context of DNA?
The exact same thing. So it loses half of its structural integrity. It degrades by half every 521 years.
Well,
It is
that's
thought.
horrifying.
Yeah. So
Wait, are you talking about like individual DNA strands left behind in the world, or like the DNA left in people?
like specifically strands of DNA are thought to degrade by half approximately every 520 years or so.
Okay.
Which, if we extrapolate that out, that means it degrades completely after approximately 6.8 million years. This is just an estimate. In practice, this can fluctuate dramatically with environmental conditions, and it can actually potentially last much longer. Environmental variables like temperature, oxygenation levels, and other attributes all influence the rate at which DNA degrades. So if you've got a fairly stable environment, say for example, like the inside of a piece of amber underground, that can go a long way towards preserving that DNA and making it last much longer than it would exposed to the open air, right?
Okay.
So this is something that is highly variable, but in general, the longer it's been, the less intact that DNA strand will be, and you need a complete genome to be able to clone something. Now, it's worth noting that fragments of DNA have been found on dinosaur bones before. In 2006, we discovered blood vessels and other structures that seem to contain whole cells within a T-Rex bone. In 2015, there also researchers found what appeared to be actual dinosaur blood in an actual fossil, and pulled from a dinosaur that lived approximately 75 million years ago. And in more recently, just in 2020, they found DNA within cartilage cells of a potential, I'm going to butcher this, Hypocrosaurus, I think. And I'll link to all of these in the description. But this is something that's happened before. It's not. Sometimes studies are reversed. We do have to worry about contamination. In one instance, in 2008, it was thought that we'd discovered cells from a T-Rex, but it turns out to actually have just come from a chicken or an ostrich that was contaminated just from cross-contamination in the lab, which has to be incredibly disappointing.
Yeah, that sounds like an embarrassing mistake.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I can't even imagine telling your colleagues about this and then having to come to them meekly later and be like, so, those 70 million year old DNA samples we found?
Yeah, Bob, what about them?
So...
They're never going to let him live it down. I bet they're still making fun of him.
So... Yes, we have, fragments of dinosaur DNA before, but as I said, the problem is that you need a full genome. In the movie, they get around this issue by saying that the engineers filled in the gaps in the dinosaur DNA with frog DNA. But that implies that already they have enough DNA where it's just gap filling. There's enough of a structure there where you can actually plug. It's like plugging holes and not just having a bunch of loose, disconnected bits that don't even approximate a genome. So even if we could get a full DNA genome from a sample of a dinosaur, which is of course extremely unlikely, there's another problem, which is that we would need a host organism to clone it, right? Which is certainly problematic. So for these reasons, it's probably effectively impossible to bring dinosaurs back, at least through cloning. DNA editing, that might be a possibility, but it seems unlikely that we will ever clone a dinosaur, for better or worse.
Well, I'm not sure whether I feel disappointed or relieved on that one. It's
Yeah.
honestly probably for the best, though. And so the difference between the cloning and the gene editing, that's the difference between actually making a dinosaur and altering something so it looks like a dinosaur, basically. Am I getting that right?
Essentially. Yeah, I mean, you would have... Yes. I mean, it gets down to how you want to define de-extinction. True de-extinction would actually be bringing back an extinct species that is like a perfect match for the genome of the extinct animal. So you have an organism that perfectly matches like the genome of an extinct species. However, you could also define it to where you're creating an organism that is just extremely similar to that extinct species and fills kind of a similar ecological niche. I suppose you can think of it that way, and it's that second thing that genome editing would actually accomplish.
And honestly, that feels like it would be, in some ways, setting aside ethical questions about all this, in some ways that would be a more satisfying way to go about this, but also a less realistic one, because we don't really know much. There's still a lot of questions about like what dinosaurs actually looked like. They're constantly like making new discoveries, like the discovery that was made shortly after Jurassic Park. They probably had feathers and things like that. And so the image that people have in our head of what dinosaurs looked like is probably wildly different from what they actually did. And so editing them, at least from what you're explaining to me, the way that I understand it, we would be changing an already existing species to look more like what we imagine dinosaurs to look like, which would be very cool and very like emotionally satisfying, but it would not give us something that probably is very close to what a dinosaur actually was like.
Yeah, that's completely true. Yeah, that's a great point. And it's funny because there is sort of creating dinosaurs according to our own imaginations. That's sort of an element of this. So, and you know what's funny is in Jurassic World, they actually kind of address that. The scientist Dr. Wu is like, you know, they were never pure dinosaurs. You know, we always were having to fill in these holes. And then you started telling us to do things like, well, we want them to be bigger and faster and more impressive and have more teeth. So kind of acknowledge that, you know, that they were never pure dinosaurs and this was always just a creation of the imagination of the scientists who worked at Jurassic Park. Happily, they just happened to be what people thought dinosaurs looked like in the 90s. So let's take a bit of a closer look at cloning. And then to close things out, we're going to examine some real-life possible examples of de-extinction. So, in terms of cloning, National Human Genome Research Institute recognizes 3 different types of cloning. One is gene cloning, also referred to as DNA cloning. This is just creating copies of specific genes or segments of the DNA. You are not actually cloning an entire organism, you're just creating, just parts of DNA. Then there's actual reproductive cloning, and this is what people typically think of when they think of cloning. This is the duplication of an entire organism, of a whole animal. And then finally there's therapeutic cloning, which is the creation of embryonic stem cells, and this is often used to create tissues that can repair or replace damage. So
this would be like growing cloned organs for transplant purposes, things like that?
Yeah. So we are going to be talking about reproductive cloning here. So in terms of reproductive cloning, animals are cloned in one of 2 different ways, with one of 2 different methods. The first method is referred to as embryo twinning. This is basically scientists split an embryo in half, and the 2 halves of that embryo are placed within a uterus, the uterus of the mother that will give birth to these organisms. Each part of the embryo will develop into its unique animal, and the 2 animals actually will, of course, share the same genes, right? Their genome will be kind of identical. Will be effectively identical, I should say. Kind of identical does not really make sense. I'm realizing as I say that out loud. No, so they will be, so the genes of the animals will actually be identical. So, now the second method is referred to as somatic cell nuclear transfer. Somatic cells are the cells comprising an organism that are not egg cells or sperm cells. So they're all the cells in your body that aren't sex cells. Those are your somatic cells. So as you may have learned in health class, depending on whether or not you were paying attention, egg cells and sperm cells only contain one set of chromosomes. And when they join during the process of fertilization, the chromosomes of the father cell merge with the chromosomes of the mother cell, and then you have one complete cell with
a complete set of chromosomes.
Yeah, with a complete set of chromosomes made up of bits of both of those parent cells. Somatic cells always have two full sets of chromosomes. And in reproductive cloning, they take the somatic cell, say like a skin cell, and then they transfer it into an egg cell from a donor animal. So they take this full complete chromosome and they put it into the nucleus of an egg cell.
Okay.
This cell has had its own DNA removed. So what happens is, as that egg develops into an embryo, then it's using the genes that were placed in there from that somatic cell. Hence, somatic cell transfer. And then they take the embryo and implant it into an adult female's uterus, and it develops. So what this means is, that researchers take the DNA and they just plug it into an egg, essentially. And then when the adult female gives birth to an animal, it has the same genetic makeup. It's got the same chromosomes of the animal that the somatic cell was sampled from. The first successful example of this was in 1996. Famously, Dolly the sheep. That was the first example of a successful attempt at cloning at this somatic cell transfer method of cloning. And that would be, if we were going to de-extinct an animal through cloning, that would be the process, and we would have to have not only a complete genome, but a suitable parent. And this is another reason that we will probably never clone a dinosaur.
Yeah, I can't even imagine what a suitable parent would be.
Yeah, definitely. Now, that said, there are some real attempts at de-extinction with species that have gone extinct much more recently than dinosaurs, that we have more DNA from, and that have more viable analogous parents, that have suitable parents that you could actually potentially use to de-extinct this animal. So, one of them is, as you mentioned earlier, the woolly mammoth. We've been talking about the potential to clone woolly mammoths for decades now. We do have actually a fair amount of DNA from woolly mammoths. There isn't enough intact DNA to guide the production of an embryo, as I understand. So they would artificially inseminate, an elephant egg with the sperm of a mammoth. And then the resulting offspring is like an elephant-mammoth hybrid, right? So it's kind of the somatic cell cloning combined with crossbreeding, because then you just carry out this process for a few generations until you end up with something that's basically a pure woolly mammoth. There's been several attempts. There's been several companies that have and research laboratories that have looked into. 2011, some Japanese scientists announced that they plan to clone a viable mammoth within 6 years. Spoilers, that did not happen. So, in 2014, the Russian Association of Medical Anthropologists found a frozen mammoth carcass that they believed would provide the DNA they needed to clone a woolly mammoth. There were plans to use an Asian elephant to produce the hybrid, and as I understand it, the DNA from this mammoth genome is being worked on currently by a team at Harvard, led by the geneticist George Church. They've edited the genome a little bit to make it more resistant to cold and have longer hair and things like that, and are hoping to introduce it into the Siberian ecosystem, from what I understand.
Where it can wreak havoc.
Yeah, right. Well, actually, George Church argues that it could actually have some positive effects on the ecosystem, with the Siberian ecosystem has essentially been missing this kind of an animal that fills its niche ever since humans sort of, hunted it to extinction, basically. But, it would be this animal that would eat dead grass, theoretically allowing the sun to reach new spring grass, and they'd help them break through dense insulating snow, which would let cold air reach the soil beneath, and they would fell trees and things and help undergrowth get more sunlight. So theoretically, at least, it could be good for the ecosystem. This is, of course, all hypothetical. It's very hard to know exactly what effects on an ecosystem introducing an extinct species will have. But that's the rationale. That's the argument being made.
As much as I would love for them to succeed at this, and for me to then be able to go back to my first grade teacher with, they did it! I told you they were cloning woolly mammoths. This feels like the thing that Jurassic Park's best point was made about, which was that we just don't know how a creature like that would interact with anything in our modern ecosystem, really.
Yeah.
And, if we were going to clone a woolly mammoth, it would probably be best not to introduce them into an ecosystem until we knew more about having studied them in captivity first. That just feels like irresponsible.
Yeah, absolutely. I should say, I believe that is part of the plan. They're not just going to turn these things loose if it happens.
Okay, because kicking one out into the wild and just saying be free feels like a bad idea.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they are from what I understand, being very careful about this. Open questions remain, whether or not this is a good use of our time and resources. You're introducing something from an ecosystem that existed tens of thousands of years ago into a new ecosystem that is currently undergoing change due to climate change. It's not clear exactly how well that species would thrive in that area, but so that's one of the arguments against doing it. It's like you've changed that animal's ecosystem, but you're trying to plug it back in there with the assumption that it's going to operate the same. So, there's certainly debate to be had about this, but, I just want to acknowledge they're not just throwing caution to the wind and gonna de-extinct this thing and then just ship it out to Siberia.
Well, that's a relief.
Yeah. So, another species is they're thinking about de-extincting is trying to get this right, the Pyrenean Ibex, Pyrenean Ibex.
Pyrenean Ibex.
Which was, spelled that Pyre, just like a pyre, and then neon ibex, was a subspecies of Spanish ibex, which that used to live on the Iberian Peninsula. Apparently, it went extinct relatively recently. I believe it went extinct in 2000, 2001. But they were able to reserve DNA samples from the last few known individuals. There have been attempts to de-extinct the species. Apparently, they used female goats as a surrogate, but the offspring had viability problems essentially. This was apparently in 2003 when this was last attempted. The technology and research has come quite a way since then, and it's possible that they could produce more viable offspring and then reintroduce this extinct species into the wild again. It was extincted. It became extinct due to overhunting throughout the 19th and 20th centuries. So, I'm more sympathetic to the idea of de-extincting species that we had a hand in
wiping out.
And making extinct in the first place. There's still a lot of questions to be solved, but I'm certainly, I think, more sympathetic to that one than I am the idea of trying to bring dinosaurs back. As cool as that would be, and I gotta say, it would be pretty cool.
The one that I would like to see brought back is the noble dodo bird.
Yes, I'm not familiar with the literature on that one. If anyone knows, feel free to comment on if there's plans to de-extinct that species. There are plans to de-extinct other birds. The passenger pigeon, that's another species that went extinct pretty recently. Again, commercial hunting and habitat loss was the result of its extinction, but, we have a fair amount of DNA preserved. Then there are other species of pigeon that are very close living relatives, and so this is pretty viable. Apparently, some labs are currently digging into this, and they hope to have a population ready for captive breeding within the next 3 or 4 years, and then potentially released into the wild by the beginning of next decade. That's interesting. We'll see how that plays out. Maybe I'm just in Jurassic Park mode, but I'm thinking about the ways that this could possibly go wrong, and I'm just envisioning hordes of aggressive pigeons blocking out the sky. But it's probably not going to be that bad.
It sounds like it could. I think we're imagining it as the birds, but I think it would probably end up looking more like birdemic.
Birdemic. They're just gonna fly with only 2 frames of animation.
Did they even have 2 frames of animation? Most of it I thought was still images. Stock up on coat hangers, people. That's all I'm saying. Stock up on coat hangers.
And finally, one last example here. Again, going to try and get this right. The thylacine, I believe, is how it's pronounced. This was an animal native to the Australian mainland, New Guinea, and parts of Tasmania. It is a type of wolf. It was called the Tasmanian tiger, and occasionally the Tasmanian wolf, but it's a carnivorous marsupial. And so it's actually fairly far from being a wolf or a tiger. But, again, this is something that was believed to have gone extinct in the 20th century, sometime around the British settlement of the continent.
I don't know enough about that one to make a statement.
Yeah, the thylacine was known, the last known one was known to have died in 1936. So, yeah, we do have DNA samples from preserved pouch specimens of this animal, and in December of 2017, it was announced in the journal Nature, Ecology, and Evolution that the full nuclear genome of this animal has been sequenced and reconstructed, and some researchers at the University of Melbourne have stated that they're taking steps towards de-extinction, which will obviously require a lot of extensive R&D, but it's that they're aiming for potentially resurrecting the species by, early 2027, 2028, somewhere around there. So yes, there's certainly individual problems with these different projects. There's ethical issues that come up. There's also just a question of resources. I mean, if we're concerned with preserving ecosystems and animals, is this really the best use of our time? It might be better to just focus on conservation entirely. But then you could also make the argument that a lot of these technologies that are being developed could be used to save species that are not extinct but are endangered of going extinct. You've got potentially just a few individuals living in the wild, but, you might be able to do a little genomic editing to increase their diversity and then breed a handful more to release in the wild to bolster their population numbers. That might be a thing you could do. So, yeah, definitely a lot to be discussed yet, but I think that is all for a different show. So, that said, I hope you've enjoyed this slightly disjointed but hopefully very informative jaunt through the science behind Jurassic Park. If you've got any animals that you would want to see de-extincted or any thoughts about this process, feel free to write in to comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Also, feel free to drop any ideas for future episodes, future pieces of media and topics, scientific topics that you would like to see covered. Feel free to send those in as well. Tyler, any closing thoughts?
Oh, God. Don't clone dinosaurs, they'll eat your face off, I guess.
Or at least just start with the herbivores, right?
For the love of God, if you're going to do it, start with the herbivores. I wouldn't object to having like a stegosaurus wandering around or something like that, but why start with the raptors? You know that's the first one they did, too. You just know that they were just like, ooh, the raptor, that'll be fun.
Yeah.
Scientists.
There's definitely a part of me that wants to ride a Triceratops, you know. that is been my dream ever since I was a wee lad, but you know, I'm not going to be incredibly disappointed.
I was always partial to the Brontosaurus.
Yeah, if that never comes to fruition, I will make my peace with it. Anyway, thank you so much for listening. We will be back soon with another show. Tyler will hopefully join us for more episodes in the future. So thanks for being part of today's episode.
Thank you for inviting me on. I had a lot of fun.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, thanks for listening, and we will see you next time.